Hey everybody, we're back for urinary system video number 2. And we're starting with the renin angiotensin system. So this is where the kidney is playing a role in regulating blood pressure. And if blood pressure falls, or if we need to raise blood pressure because we're in a fight or flight situation, so in other words, if the sympathetic nervous system is turned on, these special cells in the kidney called juxtaglomerular cells. Juxtaglomerular cells. Juxtaglomerular means next to the glomerulus. So juxtaglomerular cells are next to our glomerulus here. And these juxtaglomerular cells, or JG cells, what they're going to do is they are going to release this chemical called renin into the plasma. And then renin acts on a plasma protein called angiotensinogen, which we always have in our plasma. Angiotensinogen is made by the good old liver. And remember, we've seen this prefix before, this suffix. This ogen here, we saw fibrinogen, pepsinogen, plasminogen, and the ogen always meant inactive. And so what renin is doing, renin is converting this inactive angiotensinogen into an active chemical called angiotensin 1. But angiotensin 1 is kind of weak. And angiotensin 1 is converted into a stronger chemical called angiotensin 2 by this other chemical called the angiotensin converting enzyme. And this conversion primarily happens, somewhat surprisingly to me, in the lungs. Now let's look at angiotensin for a second. Angio means blood vessel. Tensin, think like tension. So one of the things we can probably figure out that this angiotensin 2 does is it is a vasoconstrictor. Get out of here. Google.com is now full screen. Angiotensin 2 is a vasoconstrictor, which means it increases your total peripheral resistance, which increases blood pressure. And note, the initial stimulus was blood pressure falling. So no surprise that our final result here is blood pressure rising. Meanwhile, angiotensin 2 is also going to increase blood volume in a couple different ways. It stimulates your hypothalamus to make you feel thirsty, and if you're thirstier, you drink more, and drinking more increases your blood volume, which increases your blood pressure. Plus, angiotensin 2 causes the release of two hormones. The adrenal cortex releases aldosterone, and the posterior pituitary gland releases ADH. Both of these guys increase your water reabsorption, which means you pee less, which increases your blood volume. Plus, angiotensin 2 also increases your sodium reabsorption in your distal convoluted tubule, and that is going to increase your water reabsorption as well, which increases your blood volume, which increases your blood pressure. So bottom line, the renin-angiotensin system raises your blood pressure, either in a time of need because it's fight or flight, or because blood pressure went down and we need to bring it back up again. Okay, let's talk about reabsorption now. So we know the kind of things that need to be reabsorbed are good things. So if something good got filtered, so something good ends up in the renal tubule, in the PCT, for example, we want to reabsorb it. So good stuff that got filtered get reabsorbed. And if we're reabsorbing something, it's going from the filtrate, which we know we have in our proximal convoluted tubule, and it's going into the blood, which we know we have in our neighboring, that's the worst B ever, in our neighboring paratubular capillary. Okay. Here is filtrate in the lumen of the PCT, And anything reabsorbed, whether it's water or solutes, needs to travel either through the PCT epithelium or between the cells to get into the neighboring peritubular capillary. Now, this is got a lot of stuff going on in this picture, but here's our filtrate over here. Here's our blood over here. If we're doing reabsorption, which we're going to do in our PCT, in fact, we gotta do reabsorption in our PCT, and it's called obligatory reabsorption. And I want to focus in on sodium here, because notice that sodium is moving into the tubule cell and then moving in through the tubule cell eventually into the interstitial fluid and into the blood. And this movement of sodium is going to drag these guys with it. So glucose, amino acids, other ions, and vitamins. Plus the osmotic movement of sodium is also going to drag water with it as well. And sodium will facilitate the reabsorption of other things too. We are also got other things being reabsorbed down here: chloride, calcium, potassium, other ions, urea, lipid-soluble things. All this stuff is being reabsorbed. And the reabsorption we do in our PCT, again, is said to be obligatory, meaning we got to do it. We're not going to do more of it or do less of it. We are just always going to do it. Okay. In the context of reabsorption, there is something called the transport maximum. So in this example, notice how we got glucose in the afferent arteriole, glucose in the glomerulus. Some glucose gets filtered. Of course, some remains in the blood as well. The glucose that gets filtered. Normally, we reabsorb 100% of it and we pee away no glucose. Okay? But let's say we had an untreated diabetic here. And this untreated diabetic had a whole lot more glucose molecules in their blood. A whole lot more. All right? All these new purple dots represent a whole lot more glucose. Meaning there's a whole lot more glucose in the filtrate. Now here's the thing. There is a maximum amount of glucose that can be reabsorbed. So you can only reabsorb so much glucose. So some of the new glucose will be getting reabsorbed. But because you can only reabsorb so much, there's a limit, some glucose is going to stay in the filtrate. Some glucose is going to end up being excreted. So this is what's going on in people who have untreated diabetes, mellitus, and it's just a realization. In fact, if we go back a slide or two, that's not back, that's forward. There it is. Notice we got these proteins involved in moving things, reabsorbing things. These proteins can get saturated. They can get overwhelmed. There can be too many things for them to reabsorb. And when that happens, that is called a transport maximum. Okay. Reabsorption happens in the DCT as well. And in the DCT, our reabsorption is more hormone dependent. This allows us to fine tune and adjust and do things based on homeostatic need. So aldosterone and PTH are hormones that affect the reabsorption of certain ions in the DCT in order to maintain proper homeostatic balance of these things. Now, our loop of Henle has a descending and ascending limb, and they actually reabsorb different things. The descending reabsorbs more water, and the ascending reabsorbs more sodium and chloride. And the net result of the loop of Henle's reabsorption, it is going to help us concentrate urine later on if we need to. The collecting duct does do some reabsorption. It only reabsorbs water, and only if antidiuretic hormone is present. And this is going to be if you are dehydrated. So if you are dehydrated, you are going to release ADH, you are going to reabsorb water from your collecting duct. And you're only able to do this because the loop of Henle does its job. Sorry, I went a little crazy with the marker right there. Okay, secretion. We're going to secrete things that were not filtered, but we want to get rid of them. So certain drugs and poisons, hydrogen ions to maintain proper pH, potassium ions if we need to. Those are things that are often typically secreted. And notice we're doing secretion in our proximal convoluted and our distal convoluted tubule here. All right. Nice little picture for you to check out that kind of like goes over the processes that we've been discussing here. We're going to kind of zoom through that. And I want to switch gears to another topic, which is the regulation of blood concentration. And blood concentration, in other words, plasma osmolarity, is always being measured by certain neurons in the hypothalamus. And if the plasma osmolarity changes, these neurons are going to adjust the posterior pituitary's release of ADH. And ADH affects the kidney's ability to reabsorb water. Of course, ADH, what it's going to do, it's going to act on the collecting duct, and it's going to get the collecting duct to reabsorb water. So let's run through the sequence here. If blood osmolarity is high, and this is another way of saying the blood is too concentrated, this is going to be sensed by osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus. They tell the back half of the pituitary gland to release more ADH. ADH increases the permeability of the collecting duct to water. More water gets reabsorbed, the blood gets diluted, and osmolarity comes back down. So this is negative feedback in action. This is homeostasis in action. And this is a great example of facultative reabsorption. And basically the word facultative is different from the word obligatory. In obligatory, you had to do something. If something is faculty, it's in response to circumstances. You need to do it because of the current situation. Okay, here we see our collecting duct. And notice that we have a neighboring blood vessel, part of the vasa recta. And this is urine in the collecting duct. Look how light it appears at first and how it's getting darker. It's getting darker, it's getting concentrated because we're reabsorbing water along the way. So in this scenario, we must have ADH. So in this case, ADH must be present. ADH is telling the collecting duct, hey, put more water channels in here, and we're able to reabsorb more water. And we got ADH because we're probably dehydrated. So this is what's going on when you're dehydrated. Your posterior pituitary releases ADH, and ADH tells the collecting duct to make more water channels. More water channels allow the reabsorption of water back into the blood. And the urine darkens and concentrates. If there's no ADH present, the water doesn't get reabsorbed from the collecting duct. And notice the urine just is dilute. So if we're hydrated and we pee away clear urine, it's because we're not reabsorbing that water because we don't have ADH, so our collecting duct is just letting the urine stay dilute. All right, I got 5 questions for you to do here. Pause the video, knock those out. One of them at least will be on your test. Now let's go back to that loop of Henle for a second. The job of the loop of Henle is to make the medulla of the kidney more and more concentrated as we go deeper and deeper. And that lets the collecting duct do all of its water reabsorption. I'm not going to get into the mechanics of that. Do notice that we are reabsorbing water in the descending limb of the loop of Henle, reabsorbing sodium chloride in the ascending limb. This sets up this osmotic situation in the medulla. And this is necessary for the collecting duct to do its water reabsorption which, of course, I almost knocked off my headset right there, getting kind of excited. Which, of course, we're going to do if we have ADH present. We talked about this cute little guy in lab. This is a kangaroo rat. Recall that the kangaroo rat has really long loops of Henle, which let its collecting duct do a really good job of reabsorbing water, which is essential for a desert-dwelling animal like this cute little guy right here. I wonder if kangaroo rats make good pets. I don't know. You probably don't care. I understand that. You're up for learning about the urinary system. I get that. Let's keep going. Okay. So another thing we got to talk about, we were just doing the effect of ADH. We also got to talk about the effects of aldosterone. We mentioned ADH and aldosterone when we were doing the renin-angiotensin system. And aldosterone, we established earlier, aldosterone raises blood volume. And we're going to generally make aldosterone under three situations. When sodium levels are too low, when potassium levels are too high, or when angiotensin II is present. And aldosterone acts on the distal convoluted tubule. It increases the reabsorption of sodium, the secretion of potassium, and if we reabsorb more sodium, we also reabsorb more water, and that is going to raise blood volume and raise blood pressure. Okay, got some questions here about aldosterone, and knock those out. Let me know if you get stuck. One of these will probably be on your test. Okay, we're almost done with urine. We got 2 more urine slides to go, and then we're going to talk about the ureters, the urinary bladder, and the urethra. Let's talk about diuretics for a second. Of course, diuretics are things that make you pee more. And there are a couple different examples of diuretics I want to talk about here, including osmotic diuretics. Basically, osmotic diuretics make the filtrate osmolarity increase. So the idea is we have more particles in the filtrate. Particles will osmotically draw water in, and we got more water in the filtrate, therefore, and thus more water in the urine, and we pee away that urine. Osmotic diuretics are often the mechanism for blood pressure reducing diuretics that are going to make someone pee more and lower blood volume and thereby lower blood pressure. 2 other common diuretics are caffeine and alcohol. Caffeine inhibits renal sodium reabsorption. If you reabsorb less sodium, osmotically you reabsorb less water, so you pee more water away. Alcohol inhibits ADH release. Remember, ADH is anti-diuretic hormone. So if you're blocking an anti kind of like cancels out, and so then we get more peeing. Okay, as far as urine goes, the volume varies depending on our hydration levels. pH varies, but it tends to be on the acidic side of the scale. And of course, as the volume varies, so does the color, with more concentrated urine appearing darker and darker. 95% water, 5% solutes, including waste products like uric acid and urea and creatinine, uric acid from nucleic acids, urea from protein, creatinine is a special waste product from your muscle cells and your liver cells. And of course, we have a variety of ions in the urine as well. Okay, the ureters are retroperitoneal organs that are going to travel from the kidneys down to the urinary bladder. Got a ureter in cross-section here. Notice it has an adventitia, a dense connective tissue layer on the outside. And as always, adventitias are for anchoring. And then we got a muscularis externa layer. Kind of interestingly, it is an outer circular layer and an inner longitudinal layer, which is opposite what we saw in the digestive tract. And then we have a mucosa here. Mucosal folds are present, and of course we know mucosal folds by another name. They are also called rugae. And we're going to look at that mucosa in a second, I think. No, we're not. I lied. We're going to go right to the urinary bladder. I do want to add one other fact, though, or a couple other facts. The mucosa is lined by a transitional epithelium. And the muscularis externa, the job of it is to do peristalsis, to move that urine. Okay, let's talk about the urinary bladder. So we do see a peritoneum on the top of it here. And then we see the detrusor muscle inside the wall, the smooth muscle that'll expel the urine. The detrusor muscle gives rise to the internal urethral sphincter at the internal urethral orifice right here. We also see the two orifices for the ureters. And there is a smooth region, a triangular region with corners of these holes. And this is called the trigone, and it's going to help funnel urine into the urethra. The trigone is smooth, but the rest of the urinary bladder has mucosal folds, better known as rugae. And we see the urethra extending down here. Note that the external urethral sphincter is in the urogenital diaphragm, and it is not in the same location as the internal urethral sphincter. You might remember how the anal sphincters, the external, encircled the internal. That is not the case here. Looking at a urinary bladder up here, we do see the rugae. The epithelium here is transitional, which we see here in a stretched bladder and in an unstretched bladder. And the whole point of transitional epithelium is to allow for that stretch to accommodate more urine. Notice the bulging dome-shaped cells that are characteristic of transitional epithelium. And of course, we see the smooth muscle here, which is the detrusor muscle, whose job it is to expel urine. Now, the urethra is going to pass through the pelvic diaphragm. We do see the urethra right here. Of course, this is a female. You can see the urethra, the rectum, and the vagina here. And the pelvic diaphragm is supporting urinary, reproductive, and digestive structures. And the part of the pelvic diaphragm around the reproductive and the urinary structures is called the urogenital diaphragm. And it is within that urogenital diaphragm we find the external urethral sphincter, which can squeeze the urethra here. So we do see the female urethra, internal orifice, external orifice, internal sphincter, part of the bladder, external sphincter, part of the urogenital diaphragm. And notice how the external urethral orifice opens within the vestibule created by the labia minora. If we contrast that with the male urethra, which is of course much longer and multi-part, the male urethra passes through the prostate gland. That is called the prostatic urethra. Then within the urogenital diaphragm, it is called the membranous urethra. And note that we have the external urethral sphincter around it. And then within the penis, we have the penile or spongy urethra, so called because it is within the corpus spongiosum. And of course, at the glans penis, we do have the external urethral orifice. Last thing to do today is talk about the control of urination. Fancier word for urination is micturition. When the urinary bladder stretches because of accumulated urine, stretch receptors are going to send a sensory signal to the spinal cord. The spinal cord is going to initiate a reflex response to tell the urinary bladder to contract and the sphincter here to relax, basically saying, hey, let's start peeing. But luckily, the signal of the overstretched bladder extends up to the brain. You are aware of it, and signals come down, allowing you to shut off that process, closing that external urethral sphincter tight and causing that micturition reflex to shut down. However, as more urine accumulates, the reflex will continue to occur with greater and greater strength until basically you gotta go. You can't hold it any longer. And on that note, we are done with our second urinary system video, done with the urinary system overall. So I will see you guys in the reproductive system videos. Bye-bye.